run that process.
Thank you.
Dave?
Yeah, if I could follow that up, Councillor Wilson's stolen my normal position of questioning the numbers, but it's an excellent question. The answers that the governance manager has given are true as far as they go, but when you look at the total numbers, I think it's starting to get a bad look for council when there's numbers in there. So I'm going to question one particular item, C7, which is headed Wairangi Drive speed limit reduction. I understand that there are some residual legal issues there, but the question of speed limits on our public roads surely is one that ought to appear in public only.
Richard? As I understand it, there's some sensitivity with some of the business. No?
Yep, so the base premise around speed limits, you're right, is a normal course of business for council and should be in public. This one has more of a conversation around the legal aspects of a decision and the consequences thereof, which leads it into a commercial realm. And so I'd have no issue with the council's decision on ultimately going one way or another in terms of that item and from a speed limit point of view being released, but the upfront conversation has a very legal nature to it. And that's hence the reason it's sitting where it's sitting in PX.
Was that decision that has caused this discussion within council decision and the by the commissioners, was that not public?
Yes, that was public, but there is certain steps and certain processes that we need to go through to satisfy council. They've consider all avenues from a legal perspective before they then can make that decision in terms of the ultimate outcome. At that point, council could go to public and make the decision one way or another in public. Once it's heard the various aspects from a legal perspective, the ultimate decision, once you've heard that, could be stepped into a public domain and the conversation we had in that format.
Well, that's good to know. So I was going to ask that too. So I suggest that we do that, and potentially to enable that to happen, we can move it down the list. So it's the last one. So we have that little bit of legal lens, and then we go into the debate back in public.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's the Councillor McPherson is absolutely correct. You're absolutely correct. Once we get to the position where we've actually considered the legal aspects of what we're doing, and that's been considered, then we can move through into the public for the final decision.
Could I ask that perhaps that sort of principle be used with some of the other items in future? Which part of this could be in public or should be in public be looked at?
So, Councillor McPherson, I think for the most part, this is more of a collection of items that happen to come up today, rather than an active decision to retain a certain percentage of the, not that you're suggesting this, of the meeting in PX. Whilst I'm rigorous in terms of ensuring things remain and open, the governance team are even more rigorous and hold me to account when I slip occasionally. So for the most part, today's items are just coincidentally showing up, but your point is made, and quite often you have seen items where it's the reverse, where we put everything into open and only those portions that are PX show up, and quite often we never actually get to the PX item because the elected members have considered those points and blended them in a public appropriate way in terms of the discussion and debate and open. So this one, it's just a little ears on the other way around. Yep.
Yeah. I think in terms of process, we rely on legal staff and we rely on governance to make some nuanced decisions around that. As I spoke to the person who asked us these questions, we do report into open as soon as we can. But you're right, Dave, there is a possibility on a small number of public excluded where the substantive topical conversation can occur separate from the legal and commercial conversation. Not in all instances, though. I think sometimes they're quite interwoven, so we've got to have some confidence that staff are directing us correctly on that. And also, I just note that in some of those things, like you say, speed limits, for example, we have had a number of visible to the public conversations on such matters. Whether the public take up that opportunity to look at the films or the minutes or come into workshops, that opportunity does exist. And of course, we do go out to stakeholders and groups whose local communities are affected by a certain issue, and we do go to them. So there's many ways of engaging with the public outside of just what the debate that happens in this chamber. That's my personal view. But I do have a high level of confidence in staff. Occasionally we might all get things wrong in life, and that happens. Okie doke. So we're just moving that one down, Dave, to the end so we can do the...
Sure.
All right.
Thank you.
So subject to that change, some move that the...
I'll move.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson.
Second.
Oh, we have externals?
Yeah, for that one,
Can we sit, well, let's just be fluid about that. Can we see if they maybe could come directly after lunch? And then we could,
yes, I'll liaise with Chris.
and then we, that way we can be more, otherwise we're going to go in and out. It's,
Our legal advisors and then very staff legal advisors.
if we can get all legal advisors in the room after lunch, we will endeavour to that, because it would be easier to do the public bit and then go into the public, you know, then to keep chopping up the afternoon. Let's see what we can achieve. With that flexibility in mind, Councillor Wilson has moved the confirmation of the agenda. Seconder, Councillor Thompson, all in favour? Thank you. Are there any declarations of interest on matters today? No? Okay, none. Public forum is none. So we'll go now to the confirmation of the council open minutes. Pages 6 to 45. So we want to do it as a whole suite? Yep. So seconded by Councillor Bunting, so we'll move them as a whole suite unless there are any exceptions or questions. Are there any matters arising? Being none, all in favour? Opposed? Carried. We are looking at you, Max. Thank you for putting a hand up. That's good. So now we'll move on to the Chair's report. It's pretty self-explanatory. I don't intend to go into any detail.
Madam Chair, I'm so sorry. I missed an opportunity to declare a potential, a declaration of interest. One of the items on your Chair report clearly could involve me, and unlike other remuneration that could broadly affect all elected members, I think this one in particular means that I should withdraw, just in regards to the remuneration for work as a commissioner on Hamilton City Council related hearings.
Okay. That's up to you, Councillor Wilson. I'm not
Chief Executive may want to express an opinion.
I'm not sure it's absolutely necessary. I think we note, because the decision in the report is around a separate role from your commissioner role. Obviously, there's corresponding skills, which is useful, and we've already made the decision. But I guess the dollar rate is the dollar rate we would apply to anyone who was in that role. So it's not a direct, and it's transparent right here, right?
Okay.
So,
Becca, would you give me your advice?
do you think he should abstain from the whole vote?
So the advice is, I can't give you specific advice except that you need to make a decision as to whether you feel like you're able to make a decision without being conflicted or...
I think for simplicity, I will withdraw on that item, so it removes any doubt.
On C or the whole lot?
Not on the whole thing, just
C.
on C.
All right, let's
Yep.
do it that way. That would be clean. Thank you very much. Just in respect of this, we're making some changes now to fill vacancies, not all of the vacancies, but some of the vacancies that have been created with Margaret's passing. And as you know, we will be having a review of how we're tracking as a team shortly, and that will encompass other things like how we get the very best out of ourselves for the next year, and how we can hone in on what we're doing and refine what we're doing to make that a very productive final year before the election. So I want to thank Councillor Gallagher for moving over to chair the environment and working so closely and so well with Councillor Thompson, enabling a space to be available for Councillor Wilson to chair regulatory, which is a good fit with his recent skill set. Councillor Thompson will be appointed as the Deputy Chair of Infrastructure on an interim basis. That may well continue, but we have to be aware, and this is why I have said that, we have to be aware that we're in a by-election. We could have a very competent candidate come in, and then at that stage, we may need to do some further shuffling to enable everyone to have a meaningful portfolio of work to do, because as you know, I've created a flat structure on the basis of trying to find something that everyone is passionate about and can have input on, and that's really important to me. So that is why I've made those decisions. Questions? Councillor Bunting.
Thank you, Mayor Paula. Just with regards to the deputies, no problem with the personnel at all. I'll put that out there to start with. But I'm just looking at what you can and can't do on page 59 of the next item. You can appoint the chairs of the committees, but you can't appoint the deputies. So how is this process actually working? Because you're talking about the decisions that you have made, but
This is what I'm proposing.
well, you're proposing, right. So how does it work in those situations? Because it's pretty grey.
Yeah. Well, you remember that at the beginning of the term, how it worked then was for me to have negotiated conversations with parties and try and work out something that worked well. So I proposed the chairs at that point of view, and the rest was around giving people, as I said, on the basis of everyone needs to have some meaningful work in this council and learn from others. So the deputy position is really awesome as a way of getting behind.
And fully understand that.
So
I'm just
that's
wondering
why
about
it's all
how
about
the,
spreading the workload.
Yeah, no, I understand
spreading
your
the
justification
opportunity,
for it, and there's
that's
no
how
problem with the result of it, but I'm just saying, can you actually appoint?
Can
You know,
Well, we have to appoint.
we do.
Yeah, so that's the point I was about to make. I just lost the item, sorry. Because effectively the recommendation is to approve that. So the Mayor has an obligation to consider committee structure, terms of references for those committees, Deputy Mayor appointment and Chair appointment. A key part to that, even though not specifically laid out in the legislation, is mainly because you don't necessarily need a Deputy Chair. It doesn't fit within that. But it makes sense, and it makes sense that the Mayor, any Mayor, will go through that process of considering the entire structure and how it looks. That's what happens at the beginning of the term. And Mayor Paula's approach, she tried to take a very collaborative approach to try and work it all through. But ultimately what Mayor Paula did then and what she does now is she puts it up, given what she believes is the best solution, to then offers it up to council to consider those arguments for the Deputy Chair and making it so. So that's what the resolution today will achieve. So it's entirely reasonable that the Mayor will take the leadership in that space.
Right.
And to be fair, the legislation allows for mechanisms should you disagree with the Chair and the Deputy Mayor and so forth, and terms of reference and so forth as part of that decision as well. So whilst the Mayor doesn't do the Deputy Chair, the Mayor also has there are also other ways that the council can disagree with other appointments as well. So in the end, the best thing to do is bring it back to council, make a decision, lock it down and move on. And that's what today's report's about.
Okay, I was just I guess trying to point out the grey area of this particular one, and that the deputyship isn't covered in any delegations at all.
It isn't, but I think we'd all agree we need to fill that position, and we
Oh, yeah,
also,
yeah.
also
No
need to
disagreement from
be
me there.
aware of the full team when the full team arrives. We
Okay.
need to be fair and balanced about that. Councillor Gallagher. I'm not in debate yet. So I need someone, I'm going to move my, and I'll talk to the other part of my report, the issues part, in a minute, but this part on page 46 I'll move. Is there a seconder, please? Deputy Mayor Taylor.
Just a procedural, I wonder if you'd be prepared to move A and B
Yep, we'll take them in part.
in part, thank you. So you're moving A and B?
I've got Jeff second. Yeah. Okay, well, into debate. I don't think I need to debate this much further, but I do want to just say thank you to all of you for the roles that you have taken and how you've embraced the additional workloads in many instances. I think I'm looking forward to the midterm review when we talk about the overall structure and how it's working, how it can be refined. I think fair to say, you know, it was a slow start, getting everybody to understand where they could make influence, partly because of COVID. But we're functioning as a very good team, And every single one of my councillors, the councillors, not my councillors, every one of the councillors adds great value in their portfolios, and you can see their hand and their direction and their influence in our work, which is how, as it should be. So I do like a very flat structure. I do like the opportunity to give people a chance to hone their skills, to drive their passion, and I won't apologise for that approach. Thank you. Councillor Gallagher.
Indulge me, as a newish councillor, I can help Councillor Bunting being involved with the Local Government Act. In the old days, it was first among equals, where actually all committee appointments, deputy mayor, all of that had to be by majority of councillors, and I've certainly been through that one. The new legislation is with the sort of executive mayor. Basically, the mayor has the authority to set the committee structure, but councils, at the moment in which they receive a report or assent, then they're assenting to that structure. They can, through law, as the Chief Executive said, seek to overturn that, and then if the mayor was so minded, the mayor could seek to overturn it again. So it gets all a bit messy. I'm actually going to use this time to compliment the mayor in the way in which she's engaged with colleagues on this particular exercise. So it's not some sort of edict from on high, but it's been a genuine involvement in discussion, and in any board, you know, it's really good that you get the buy-in of the team. I'll take the opportunity to congratulate Councillor Wilson to chair the Hearings Committee, and I certainly acknowledge the really high bar now that you have to, when you do the RMA training, the incredibly high bar that you go through that, and I certainly think you'll be well suited, and also thank him for the Te Huia role that is ongoing. I also want to, if I may, forgive me, because I had a role at the beginning of the term, sort of there, where I'm, as one of the less new councillors, was role to perhaps assist the brand new councillors, and I think in Sarah, Kesh and Maxine, and I'm not wanting to patronise them, I think we've got some really significant elected members of substance. I'm saying that in a detached way in terms of just the way they've adapted to the task, and I certainly very encouraging of all three of them to continue to play a really full role. I'm seizing on your words, interim possibly, but I think I would reflect my view and Angela's view, who can't be here today, that we would hope, colleagues and Mayor, that Councillor Thompson would carry on and be the deputy to the operations until obviously the end of this term. And I think there's a huge synergy between her role in environment and operations. I think there's some significant issues in operations that Sarah can make a really good contribution in. And with the midterm briefing, Your Worship, I certainly want to have a really good talk, you know, with Maxine and obviously Kesh and Sarah, just making sure that the whole team is doing, you know, and acknowledge your the fact of the by-election. But I'm actually going to compliment you on the way in which you've involved the team in this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Thompson.
I just briefly wanted to congratulate the appointees to their new roles, and is Kesh, she's not here at the moment, but to her new role there as well, and also welcome Councillor Martin to the Environment Committee. We've already welcomed him with open arms and been doing some good work, so thank you.
Thank you very much. Deputy Mayor Taylor.
Thank you, Mayor Southgate. Yeah, congratulations to those involved in these rearrangements. And I also, you know, want to remember Margaret Forsyth today as well, given that her passing has led to some of these changes. I think one of the real winners in this whole term has been the flat structure that Mayor Southgate put together right at the start of the term, which I think has just changed an awful lot of dynamics in the way this council works. Everybody has an opportunity, everybody has a job, and there's a lot more equity, I think, in the way we operate there. So I would emphasise that we have a new elected member coming. We don't know who it's going to be. We're all very excited about it. And they will need a job. they need to fit into a structure somewhere because that's how we work as a team. So something will have to change somewhere, as the Mayor says, and so we just all need to be ready for that. And of course we have the midterm review coming up, which is a good opportunity to look at how everyone's performing. So yeah, well done everyone. Well done Sarah, well done Councillor Wilson, and yeah, thanks Claire.
Thank you. Councillor McPherson.
Certainly like to echo what the Deputy Mayor's just said and make the point that the last council probably suffered when it was in this position by not ensuring that the new member coming on midstream, as it were, Councillor Hamilton, had a decent job reflective of his abilities that he's certainly able to show now. The other point I want to make is that there's an old adage going around that is definitely showing up here, the adage being that it's never too late to teach an old dog new tricks, and I certainly see with Councillor Gallagher being appointed to the Environment Committee that he's going to be learning a lot of new tricks that he hasn't had to the fore previously.
Point of order, the honourable member is maybe slightly older, but definitely not a dog.
Thank you. Always appreciate a bit of humour in the meeting.
I think you're serious.
Councillor Wilson.
Can we have a vote on that?
I'm going to be very brief. I just want to support a lot of the commentary around this table. And Mayor Paula, my comments to you, I am really appreciative of the leadership that has led to the structure that Deputy Mayor Taylor has mentioned and others. In my nearly 5 terms over a 20-year period, I haven't had the privilege of working with such a collegial council, and I really mean that. And I do think that's reflective of the fact that we all feel we've got a purpose, and there's nothing quite like feeling we've got a purpose. So I want to say thank you. I'm quick to critique and comment at times, but I also want to say well done on that. Because that's a form of leadership that may have been missing in previous councils, and it's one I appreciate.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. The team is as always as strong as all its members as individuals, so we come together as a team, as a strong team. It's great. We'll go to the vote for A and B.
Councillor Van Oosten.
Max, are you voting for A and B? Yep.
The motion is carried unanimously, noting Councillor Van Oosten is voting via Zoom.
I just wondered if I could ask a
Yeah,
process question on
I was
that.
going to say we should stop and pause.
Becca, given that the elected member support policy doesn't appear to be attached here today, I'm just wondering the $80, is that still a fit for purpose amount? I'd just like to know where that sort of sits, if there's an opportunity for us to review that.
Sure, so the $80 amount is what's recommended in the Remuneration Authority determination. So they've specifically recommended up to $80 an hour for commissioners who are elected members for council. Obviously, commissioners who, and Luke's here to help respond to questions on this, commissioners who aren't elected members get paid a lot more than that. So the $80 an hour is consistent with what's done across the country in terms of the amount for those councils that have elected members who act as commissioners.
Okay.
And just as a note of point on that, the applicants pay for this. And so this is the Remuneration Authority determines that amount as a fair amount, given that you're also an elected member serving the public. Councillor McPherson.
Was on the same subject, and those are good introductions from both of you to my question. So would it be fair to say, in our circumstance now with only one elected member, this is probably to Becca, who is qualified to sit on those panels, that if I were an applicant, I would be just about always seeking to reduce costs, for which we often get complaints about, the cost of resource consent hearing, seeking to ensure that any councillors available are always on the panel, which will reduce their costs significantly.
I wouldn't be able to speculate on that, Councillor McPherson.
Yeah, my experience is that's not so, but because there's a process to appoint the commissioners for each hearing, and it's based on skill and technical expertise and so on. While applicants can reject, can't they? They can reject a set of commissioners and ask
Challenge at least.
challenge
I
it,
think, yeah.
but they don't get to handpick. So that's the safety net here.
I'm just, it's ironic that I think it's $250 an hour, something around that, 240 for a
It depends.
non-councillor.
There's a fee structure they consultants.
Luke, can you just respond to that question, please?
$200 an hour is effectively the average rate for the commissioners that are recently appointed, but for chair roles, it's slightly more, goes up to $200 an hour.
Yeah, and that's because they're consultants and they set their own rates. And if they become too expensive, they just don't get work.
So 220.
No, they don't get a choice. Everyone, no matter whether they're a consultant or fresh off the boat sort of thing, still gets $220 an hour if they're not a councillor, eh?
No, it's average. It's average.
Luke, we'll just...
Yeah, so that would be the average, the upper rate is 220, that's for the chair, it's a separate qualification.
No, I'm not talking about that, I'm talking about the ordinary member rate.
But
So
yeah,
we're comparing apples with apples, $80 versus $220, there's no choice.
I'm understanding you, but I understand commissioners can charge less. They don't have to take, they can be anywhere along that continuum, can't they? So you can get commissioners who price themselves less because they want more work, or...
Do we have some in that category? Maybe this is for another time, but, you know, we do get I have literally heard applicants bemoaning the fact that they've got a 3 days set for a hearing, for instance, and they're adding up all the commissioner costs, and it's tens of thousands of dollars, and, you know, so I think cost is a factor for some applicants, especially when it's,
So we're getting into debate now,
you know, not sort of professional applicants.
Yeah. So is that your debate or a question?
Well, I'm trying to tease out whether we really push for our members to be as involved as often as possible, because there's a large panel, and often it's availability, but there'll be more than just 3 available.
So I guess we've got Luke and Grant here who could possibly speak to the process of how the commissioners are chosen.
Let's take that offline, because I think it's an area of learning for councillors we don't want to spend too much time on today. And we're just approving the amount, as we've said, is set by the Remuneration Authority. And I've actually been one of these commissioners until recently for a long, long time. And we used to get paid $40 an hour. But and 60 if you were the chair, and you could be in a hearing for 3 weeks. But this council now only has 1, because Angela and ours has lapsed. So congratulations to Ewan for doing the training and getting really good marks in that training, a really good result. I think it's a strength in our council to have commissioner-trained councillors on board as well. So, any other debate? Can we? Yeah.
The question that I don't think got answered in the earlier 2 questions, is the $220 and $200 an hour rate, is that also set by the Remuneration Authority as an upper figure?
No, it's not. It's a commercial rate.
So it's a market supply and demand.
That's the rates that were put in by the responses to the tender that we issued when we called for new commission.
Okay, thank you.
There are actually some lawyers with long experience who charge more than that in the open market elsewhere. So it is commercial. However, let's John, go on. Yeah.
I'm just wondering if I don't have enough. Perhaps it's me. I'm comfort around approving it. So I'm just wondering if we defer it and test that out a bit more rather than me put up an amendment.
Well, I don't think we can adapt the amount that the Remuneration Authority sets. What I think we could do, though, Ryan, is to approve it today, which means that should Ewan be appointed to a hearing short any day now, he would be paid, and we can have a review of the overall way that commissioners works and the pricing, the appropriate pricing of that. I'm happy to even add that in as a.
Okay.
So can we either make it a minute note? Do you want me to add it in or just make it a minute note?
Yeah, minute note would be good.
Minute note's fine. It already has been moved and seconded. I've probably spoke enough about it, and I just again want to say congratulations to you and Martin.
Yeah, can you confirm that, as our only councillor who has gone through this very high bar of RMA training, that will be an excellent skill base in order to chair the Hearings and Engagement Committee?
I can, and I have been through that same high bar of training at the chair's level as Angela, and it is a brilliant course. Not easy though, Ewan, hours and hours and hours, right? So congratulations. It's a good fit of skills. It's been moved, it's been seconded. Are there any further discussion? No. All in favour, please. Oh, we'll vote on the board, sorry. We will go on the board. Capture it. You're not putting me on this. Oh, sorry, I didn't touch either. Just so I can see the map. Has it gone?
Councillor McPherson and Gallagher, we're just revoting.
It's on the camera from my upstairs screen. But I should be able to get in with.
Councillor Gallagher? The motion is carried unanimously.
Good morning. Good morning.
Tina Tato. This report is a review of the decision that this council made last year to make 2 amendments to the delegations to positions policy as part of its COVID-19 response. The 2 key changes were an exemption to the CE's delegated financial limit and a change to the civil defence delegations. This report proposes to retain the exemption to the Chief Executive's delegated financial limit with the addition that it be used in exceptional circumstances. The civil defence delegations have undergone more of a rewording to clarify that it's not actually a delegation from council, it is a delegation that sits elsewhere and council has the power to set those reporting requirements. So that is not really a change, just an amendment of the wording there. Otherwise, I will take the report as read and happy to respond to any questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Sorry. No, there aren't. Councillor Bunning moves. I'll second. All in favour? We'll go vote on the board then. So we're taking that vote, Max.
The motion is...
Three Waters reform update. Good morning.
Good morning. Shall I kick off?
Yes, please.
Just want to introduce Mr. Stephen Halliwell, who we've engaged to assist us with the reform program as we move forward. So Stephen will be seen around the building a little bit more in the future. Some may recognise him from previous projects in Hamilton City.
Yeah, we so missed you with the recent LTP.
Thank you. I'm just going to give a very, very quick overview. So, because the key the key point is that no decisions have been made by central government in relation to this reform. And on page 90, which is attachment 2, the timeline, it clearly shows in April, May, there will be a cabinet decision in relation to the reform, so that has not happened. So this report is essentially an information report around things that have occurred over the last few months, but there are a couple of key decisions. So one is to expand the political reference group to include Mangai Norm, and the second is to approve feedback from this council to Local Government New Zealand in relation to the reform as well. And that draft feedback is set out on page 109. I'm happy just to stop there and just take any questions, Your Worship.
Okay, are there any questions? This is an incredibly complex and fast-moving arena right now, and I know the conversations are happening on a daily basis in Wellington at a policy and legal level. So we're really in amongst the thick of the conversation with Local Government New Zealand. They are interested in a metro position, and we understand that announcements will be made in one form or another in the next couple of weeks, and those dashboards are going to be absolutely like throwing a mirror up in front of some councils now. While Hamilton City Council doesn't have a lot to fear itself in looking in the mirror as to how we run our water assets, the biggest picture story is quite immense. $127 billion potentially forecast and peer-reviewed investment. So I guess from my point of view, councillors, I'm really interested in your questions, and then I am interested in your feedback, because I am now talking every day with Wellington about where we go with this. And we do need to reach a position about what we want to do to inform this reform, because change is coming, and I suspect that by the time that those of us who are attending local government conference are there, the whole world will look a little different around this water thing. That's, I can't sort of say it more full on than that. We will have some feedback from government, and it will be revolutionary in many ways, and something we have to adapt to by local government conference. That's my pick if I was a betting person. Councillor Pascoe.
Yeah, thanks, Chair, and thanks for the report. Two questions. One is I found the indicative stats for the region on paragraph 14 very, very helpful. Who's included in the region? Because, you know, we're already hearing some who are opting out. Are these the opt-ins, and to what extent has the region been defined in these stats?
So this is our shot at giving an indication of scale, and these stats capture the combined Waikato Bay of Plenty region. That may or may not be the size of the entity when government makes decisions, but we've just picked that as an easy spatial footprint to grab some data to give a sense of scale for a water business.
So that includes Tauranga and Rotorua?
Correct.
Yes, yeah, and right up the top of right up the top of Coromandel.
Correct. Yeah. So, but it's not to second guess what an entity might look like.
Yeah, no, and I find that table very, very helpful, and maybe something that we'll constantly refer back to in terms of where we might fit in to that. And my second question is around attachment 5, which is I take it as our feedback to Local Government New Zealand, and Mayor Paula's earlier comment that things are changing on a day-to-day basis. Is there anything in that feedback that we gave that has been superseded by anything else?
No. My view is it's important to have a council position as quickly as possible, and this attachment would provide that position, because things are going so quickly. And I think it's very helpful in this reform that we get a resolution today, and then we make that known in terms of where we sit as an organisation and as an elected member body.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Councillor McPherson.
Rob's asked a number of questions that cover some of my points. Just following though from his, have we gotten the indication back from the government whether they like this idea of the regional, Bay Plenty Waikato Regional Consortium? Are we pushing the proverbial uphill, or is that something they'd like to hook onto with us doing the work for them, sort of thing?
Our selection of the footprint from the data was informed by areas of interest. So, I think, as is speculative, I think there's very likely to be something around the combined Waikato Bay of Plenty area, potentially slightly bigger, but certainly I think it's likely there'll be something around that.
So slightly bigger, not going in the Auckland direction, but going in the Taranaki direction, perhaps?
Potentially, yeah.
We'd be guessing at this
We're
stage,
guessing.
because we don't, because Auckland are still having their own level of conversation with local government, and I was on a call yesterday, so I'm as up to date as I could be on this. But in respect of that, Dave, the local government New Zealand is trying to look for exemplars to lead a suggestion to government to shape the entity, a way of managing water, rather than to have a defined entity put upon us. So this is our last opportunity, really, to kind of say, well, here, we've got a really good idea that we're bringing to the table. We've got some strong relationships across here. We're willing to co-design with you, government, what works for the Central North Island. That's one of the views I hold, and I know that they're interested in taking an interest in what Hamilton is doing because of that, because we are showing leadership in collaboration and innovating in this space, and that's what we've got to do. My concern is we've got the tyranny of pace here. The pace is so fast. So yeah, the answer to your question, Dave, is I think if we came out with something bigger than what we have now and more cost-effective, government would embrace that opportunity.
Yeah, thanks. When you said we're talking about the councils that have sort of nominally agreed to be part of a potential consortium like this, does that include every council in the region you've listed, or are we just really saying the big ones have agreed and the little ones probably will have to follow suit because they size-wise don't have much choice?
I'll just change some of the questions slightly, because the councils in the Waikato Bay of Plenty have not agreed. It'll be a government directive that comes through. So the councils in the Waikato Bay of Plenty have agreed in a consortium to do some work to prepare for the reform.
All of the ones? No,
all bar two.
Okay.
So, and that excludes Kawerau and Apotiki. They're the only two. Apart from those, all others are.
Tauranga.
Tauranga's in.
So the government-appointed commissioners have not agreed to this yet?
So the consortium work only relates to thinking about some of the common issues that might face the councils in the reform. It's not, there's been no decisions that is an entity footprint. And the
No, I'm talking politically here, Andrew, and I'm trying to find out why Tauranga is not included.
You know,
the implication to Rob, they are.
Every council in the combined
You said
Waikato, bar Apotiki and Kawerau.
Oh, Kawerau, sorry.
Yes,
yeah.
yes.
Sorry, I misheard you. Okay.
But those conversations those conversations are going on even as we speak.
Yeah.
And we try, and the Commissioner Anne Tolley is.
No, I mean, I understand that, but this is politically, it makes it a lot easier if nearly everyone's involved.
Yes.
And there's a couple that you would describe perhaps as rats and mice that aren't yet involved and are not going to have the choice of going alone very much. But one of the other issues you just mentioned was that the government's going to mandate this. Now, I know that was our submission, that the government should do this, but my understanding was that hadn't yet been decided whether it's a matter you can opt out by choice or stay in or...
A poor choice of words on my part. So it's a government-led reform. The government make decisions. One of the big decisions is the nature of that reform, whether it's all in or opt-in, opt-out. So that'll be part of the government's decision-making process. So I apologise for using the mandate.
But they are making a decision on that process before deciding on the areas and things like that, are they? So we'll understand where we sit.
As I understand it, there'll be decisions on the number of entities, the footprints of the entities, and then the form of the reform, whether it's an all-in, type reform, or it's an opt-in, opt-out type
In
reform.
that order.
Possibly, we don't know.
So just talking, if it's helpful, Dave, from a couple, we've been having weekly webinars at the local government level, which I've been in. What DIA have indicated is that if councils do choose to opt out, there will be criteria to be met, and they're still working through that conversation. And that's something that we usefully can engage with or have input into. So, for example, they would include the ability to meet the NPS fresh water, in other words, to deliver what you've got to around the standards. The second thing would be able to meet the cost burdens of your community for the next 30 years and demonstrate that if you don't go into an entity, how you would, on your own, deliver the level of service required and that your ratepayers could afford it. So there'll be some lenses applied to opting out. But, you know, and what you said about the politics of the Waikato, to be fair, the answer to have all the councils in the Waikato, the Zone 2, opted in, or, you know, coming along singing from the same song sheet, no. But we're working with as many progressive councils or people with open ears at the moment to see what we can deliver, what we can do together if we put all our combined resources and thinking together.
I understand that, though Andrew's answer was that all the Waikato councils have agreed to participate in this preliminary piece of work, but because Potoki and Kawerau are in Bay of Plenty.
Look, there's a range of views. Look, in the zone, in the mayoral, if you attend the mayoral forum, you will hear that not all of the mayors...
You're talking about the final outcome, whereas Andrew's talking about this piece of work that's reported to us today.
Even so, not everybody's as enthusiastic around the Waikato councils. Let's be honest, it's not. Some people are not willingly engaging. There's some councils, and this came up in a conversation I had yesterday, some councils are still in the resist and being entrenched in their position of nothing's broken, what are we trying to fix, or we can do it on our own, we don't need government to come in. And that includes some of the Waikato councils.
Okay, well, I'm sort of not getting a great sense of how it exactly is panning out. And as has been said, this is such a fast-track thing that by the time of the next meeting, the Cabinet will have issued its paper, I think, and we'll, you know, if we're proposing to someone, the government or LGNZ, that we be one of the trial horses or the trial horse of this region, I'd just like to have a good sense of how willing the whole region is.
Work in progress, and Toby, who's the chair of Zone 2, is doing a great deal of work with the Waikato councils. He's already very committed to this process, to working with us for this end.
Okay, on to technical question, just looking at the table, which I also found really helpful. Thanks. I'm just checking that I'm reading this right. When you're looking at the asset replacement costs for all of those areas, the costs we're likely to foot a higher proportion of the bill than our population would suggest. So does that mean that our assets are older, or we currently maintain them to a higher standard? I'm just trying to get out of that. What is it going to be cheaper when we're all together because we're averaging it all out? I'm trying to see what those higher figures in the bottom third there tell us.
It's a good question. It's all very speculative until we know the exact number of entities and their footprints, and we can do the.
But assuming this.
Yeah, I'm going to call on a friend in my reporter to help, but.
There's probably aspects of this in terms of the nature of our kit and the level of probably sophistication in the type of kit we have from a water's perspective as well. So I'm not going to necessarily give that as an answer to Dave. I'm still giving it to you as a prompt. And then if you can... Yeah,
well, see, my difficulty as a representative on the governance group, I haven't seen any of this until this meeting, you know, for the meeting today. So I'm asking questions I would normally be asking offline, as it were.
On which governance group?
Sorry?
On which
Three Waters.
That's it goes through infrastructure, doesn't it?
It's not connected.
Yes.
So just through the chair, and answering to Richard's comments, the complexity of our infrastructure is quite different to a lot of the other smaller councils. So our values do tend to be quite greater. We've got a very advanced water and wastewater treatment plant, which is probably compares well to Tauranga, but not necessarily to a lot of the other treatment plants around the region. We also have, in terms of asset age, our average asset age is actually on par or below the average for the region, so we're in a good position there.
So yeah, I'm just trying to work out whether what that means if we join forces and things get averaged a bit more. Do we continue to pay a higher sort of share? Is that how it would work, or do we average it across the region? We pay a slightly lower share than we're currently paying based on that sort of technical background?
So that's actually a key part of our feedback,
Yes.
isn't it? So in the submission that you see there, Dave, if there's can you have a look at it and think about it now, how we can pick up that, because our support for this will be subject to certain data, certain understandings, but it's not all in regardless of what. It's about being in the process. So you raise a really good point. Devil's in the detail.
It may be that we want to keep a higher standard than most of the others because of our complexity, and might have to pay for it anyway.
And we definitely need to do the work to answer the questions you're asking. It's very difficult though, and I'm not sure the value of putting time in on a table like this until after we have at least have a decision from government. We know the footprint, we know exactly who's in that footprint, but we are going to have to be able to understand the impacts, for this city in the context of an entity as this reform moves forward. But the key for me is a decision. Is there a reform? That's the key decision.
Yeah, I agree with that, but the flow-on effect is what effect does it have on our finances, on our water standards and things like that? And some of that may need to be factored into the annual plan next year. Any adjustments to the LTP will need to be made perhaps then. And we would need to know by the end of this year, what we're going to try and put into that, if anything.
To give some confidence, so the plan is when there's a decision, we know the footprint. One of Stephen's roles will be to work with our finance team and to start to look at the draft, what's currently the draft LTP, so we can understand what a world might look like post-reform, and we will be engaging with elected members as we understand that data.
Does that mean we have the live finances like we used to have with you, Steve?
We haven't got a screen big enough for the zeros.
And Dave, to give you confidence, your questions are absolutely on point.
Yes.
In terms of the feedback that LGNZ is giving to government on a daily basis, and it comes down to the transition and sequencing. It does come down to how we deal with assets and debt, and aspects like price harmonisation are part of the conversation. So today, what it would really be great to do is by the end of this session to see your main points reflected in the submission points there.
And I think the other aspect,
that helps me.
The other aspect is the correlation between, we may well have high renewal costs, but other smaller councils have high costs to achieve compliance. So there's these swings and roundabout scenarios that are sort of going on, we need to factor in as well.
Or other councils might have much fewer connections to a reticulated system.
Yep. That's right.
Can I just add, we're expecting an information release. We provided 7,000 odd data points through to the Water Industry Commission of Scotland's WICS. That is expected, their analysis of that is expected to come back to all councils. And that's going to start seeing how they've interpreted. So we saw the macro, the whole of the country, in their release last week. We'll be able to look at that hopefully at a regional level, and that'll start giving us some indication on that.
Okay. Thanks.
So if I may just offer one more comment to Councillor McPherson. So the the prize today here is just a focus on the outcomes, and those are we've tried to capture in the draft LGNZ submission. I think a lot of the questions relate to the structure of a deal that will have to come once a reform decision is made by central government. So we will be doing a lot of work in this area, and even your questions there are quite helpful in terms of helping us focus our energy going forward. But there is going to be a point where there's going to have to be a discussion around a deal across not just our council, but all councils in a given entity as well.
What, just one final one, governance of any new entity or any trial entity, how's that working? Is there going, I mean, I'm thinking of Wellington Waters has an advisory committee that's a cross-council advisory committee of elected politicians, and they've just refreshed that, I noticed last week, I think. And they have a management board as well, an executive board as well of some sort. What are we proposing, what's this region proposing, A, for the interim, say, trial or establishment, and B, long-term, what's the thinking?
We haven't, and we would be very interested in your feedback, because the opportunity here post a government announcement, so the initial announcement will be number of entities and their footprints. There'll be subsequent announcements, I think, around governance arrangements. So as we go forward, I think it'd be very useful to have elected member feedback on how those governance arrangements could work, because the issue, I think, is how you reflect the community's needs into a water entity. And that's something I suspect we would want to have a very strong view on going forward.
Yeah, should we not be suggesting that any trial or what stalking horse sort of arrangement that we put up has some sort of advisory board of a similar nature to what we might favour long term? Otherwise, we're going with just a technical thing for a couple of years, and then we're suddenly jumping into something else.
So to pick that up, I think you make a good point. Also, a point that's been raised nationally about how do we retain local democracy and governance. There are potentially, therefore, some parts in Attachment 5 that could be strengthened.
Yes.
I've considered, as Dave has talked about financial assistance, that's key. We've talked about price harmonisation, and we've talked about local democracy, and I think in that attachment those are woven in there, but not potentially could they be strengthened in any position that we take from here on out. And I'll get the other questions through, and then we'll come to some debate, discussion about it. Sarah.
Thank you, Chair. I have a question around just the cost of the participation in this. Andrew, have you had any indication as to whether there will be assistance from government in that regard? It was around 700-something thousand starting point.
Yeah, so all the cost to participate at the moment has been met through the Three Waters stimulus package, which is reported separately to the IO, Infrastructure Operations Committee, through the work Maire's leading. So that 760k is 100%, has 100% financial assistance. There's a natural end to that work stream, so what we'll be looking for in the future is what a future package might look like. But at the moment, for our council at the very least, there's 100% financial assistance.
Okay, thank you. And another question is, just in terms of governance and looking at our draft submission there, have we given consideration to ways that you can have that, I guess, community or democratic input going forward through these reforms?
No, that's work to come, and we would value your feedback as elected members on that as well. I think the government will also have a view as part of their multi-stage announcement as well, but as we go forward, I think it would be very desirable to have a view around what would work for our community and to put that on the national table.
Absolutely, that's what this is about. But
Yes.
let me just clarify, Sarah, it's not a submission. I know I use that word myself. It's a couple of pages of feedback points, because there is no formal submission process, but we do need to have a view of council. So,
Okay, thank
sorry,
you.
carry on.
And Ryan has said I might be poking the bear with this question, but just looking at the table, there's about 55% of residential dwelling, well, households are connected to water meters in the region, and 2% at Hamilton. So how do we navigate this in terms of, ensuring that whatever happens going forward, that there's equity for people and, fair transition? Do we know what is going to happen potentially with water metering? Is it up to each city?
No, we don't know. So this table is a statement of fact, and if there's a reform and an entity is established, then the entity will make its own decisions, but in the context of the governance arrangements that we've been talking about. So I couldn't predetermine the outcome of those discussions.
Yeah, so there's been no indication of what they'd be looking at this stage. There's no indication so far.
No, and it's the decision around meters, it's just too detailed. At the moment, the discussions are up at the highest level possible. Is there a reform? What's the footprint of the entities? That's where the discussion's at the moment.
Yeah, I guess that's something which is of great community interest, and so you think that conversation really then, the first part of that is then what do we do is in terms of governance?
I think so. I think once the decisions are made, I think having a view on governance arrangements would be critical, and to get the community voice into the decision making of the entity will be essential.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, and you make some good points with that question, and I think when the dashboards come up, there will be a cost to your community that can then be interpreted as to what the costs for Hamiltonians would be versus, I don't know, our neighbouring councils, etc. And then, Councillor Pascoe.
Thank you. A couple of questions that have come out of the questions from Councillor Dave. Just around paragraph 14 and our seemingly high asset replacement costs, is that possible that it is a more accurate assessment of what the replacement costs are, given our asset management plans and the fact that other councils that are included in this table might not be aware of what their replacement costs are, or might not have as an accurate assessment of their replacement costs?
Through the Chair, I couldn't comment on how other people have valued their assets, but I guess the information that we provided in our response to the request for information was as accurate as we could provide based on our last valuations that were done back in 2018.
Okay, but it may well be that their replacement costs, if we're all buying on the same market, then we're all paying the same price, aren't we? That their replacement costs could be percentage-wise higher.
So this data isn't based on the assumption of all buying on the same market. Everyone will be on a different revaluation cycle. At some point in the process, one imagines that we'll all have to go onto the same revaluation cycle if it gets to that stage in order to do the transfer.
Okay. So, and just to clarify on that paragraph, on that table in paragraph 14, to my earlier question and perhaps what Dave has teased out, Opotiki and Cowrell, are they included in this, even though they might have to date indicated that they might be likely to opt out?
My understanding is not. I'd have to just double check, but they won't have a material impact on the numbers in the table.
Okay, that's possible, okay. And last question is around the submission, and I noticed that the submission is, in attachment 5, is silent on asset value transfers and debt, which Mayor Paula has already alluded to in her discussion. Should we be at least putting a spade in the ground that is an area of, that is a touch point that needs to be considered, because my understanding to date, the government have been quite vague on, whether they're going to pay or whether the entity is going to be required to pay for the net assets that they might take off Hamilton City, and indeed the other local authorities. So should we be making reference in that to, that we would be expecting there to be a good deal of transparency around how assets are valued and the percentage of assets that have got the debt that attaches to those assets.
We can, if you would. This is your submission. We've tried to compile it with feedback from various selected members. If you want to add that in, we can.
It's feedback, not a submission. That's the point.
Yeah.
We can.
Do you think is there a reason why we're silent on that at this stage? Or
So this funding paragraph that's in the submission,
hang on, I'll just find it.
on page 110.
Yep.
And the feedback, yep, I've just been corrected. It talks about three parts to the funding at a very high level, so that we're funded to participate in that, and that's the stimulus funding we've got to date has allowed us to do that. Then it talks about funding for the transition itself, and so in drafting this didn't specify all the things that could be listed in that.
Okay.
But all those things that you just talked about would be listed in that. And then, like we did when we go back to the last time we looked at amalgamating water services in the Waikato, the cost of what we called the stranded overhead in those days, but reframing what the new council organisation minus waters would look like, that cost we're suggesting should have a contribution from the government. Our ratepayers shouldn't be contributing to a cost that's been created by government reform. So I've kept it at a fairly high level because a lot of decisions have yet to be made, and as we've said, the decision that the reform is proceeding has not yet been made.
Okay.
So that's just.
I wonder if just adding the words water assets and after staff or after equipment is a bit more clearer, because I read that as being focusing on the stranded overheads, and the software and equipment to me might be, the computer screens or something, and not all that significant valued infrastructure of pipes in the ground and heavy machinery and land and buildings.
We can take that on board.
Yep, thank
Absolutely.
you. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's one area we can strengthen, that whole focus on the fiscal envelope at all stages of, because that's also something that's very consistent with what local government is saying. The value of assets, the transfer of assets, the value of the assets, the debt, the fiscal envelope that comes with the change, and how that's going to be divested and so on to have a and the price harmonisation all comes into that, so that the benefit for Hamilton ratepayers is as fair as it should be. I'm going to take Councillor Gallagher first and come back to you, Dave. Is that okay?
And just with the attachment 5, our feedback, with paragraph 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, paragraph 6, our council is already working with our regional and local neighbours to be ready for early adoption of the reform initiative. Hamilton and its Waikato council parties have a long and successful history of partnership and cooperation to support better outcome for our regional residents. We have the political will, the staff expertise, the built asset base to play a key role in enabling delivery of the Hamilton Scales. I know we have the will. In light of previous costly attempts to establish a regional water entity that went nowhere, do you think that's a little optimistic?
In the context of our spatial planning and other non-water related work, I think it is. But if the feedback is we should pare that back, we can take that on board.
Well, the way I read that, Martin, is that we have a will to participate in the process of designing this new future at this point in time. Now, when that other decision was made, and we all know how politics let that fall down, it was just a little bit of politics, not the substantive reports or the benefits that could be derived. It was politics that brought that to its knees, not in Hamilton City Council. This time, reform is coming. Reform is coming. Government are definitive about that, not taking it off the table. So I guess our political will is, and I hope you're on board with that, is that we work really hard to shape that reform future for Hamilton. So I'd like to understand, and from councillors, if you feel differently than that, then do let us know.
I'm just hopeful, a little bit of a road to domestic conversion by one or two of our TA partners, not implying Waikato District Council, because I totally respect the direction they went in.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's an individual
whether there's look, in the end, I mean, you're our rep, and you'll say offline or online with your colleagues. The history of some of this stuff has been a little bit challenging, but if this is a good optimistic submission that absolutely upholds the incredible will and initiative of local government, in spite of our past experience, fine. I'll say no more. I'm hopeful.
Excellent. We'll get round to that in debate. Can I just ask a couple of quick questions before we go to Dave? Just want to ask about whether it would be useful to include a reference to the regulatory regime of water, not just the service delivery, because that's not mentioned at all in ours, and I know that it has been mentioned. It was mentioned in Rotorua when some of us attended that DIA thing. That it's hand in glove. We've got to have a proper regulatory regime as well as service delivery. Can we put that in?
Yes.
Thank you. The other one, in terms of iwi participation, I see that we mentioned Te Ture Whaimana, which is the co-governance legislation for the Waikato River. I didn't see, unless I didn't read it properly, no, I didn't see Te Mana o Te Wai, because that is something that government is paying a lot of attention to at the moment.
We'll add that in as well.
We can reference that.
Yes.
Thank you. That's my question. Councillor McPherson.
Yeah, just a question arose following Sarah's very helpful questioning in support of my next election campaign.
I'm going to talk to you as the environmentalist.
For which I thank you deeply. It makes my campaigns a hell of a lot cheaper every time. It used to be every time General Manager Chris raised the point, but now you're doing it. Can you confirm that Wellington Water, which has a somewhat similar regional arrangement, has amongst its 6, I think, participating councils, some that have water meters and some that don't have water meters and just charge a bulk charge for the water crossing into their boundary or water exiting their boundary?
I don't know. Do you know, Mairi?
I wouldn't have asked that if I didn't know the answer. Yeah, thanks. So it's possible to have different means of charging for water within the region, in other words, technically.
I think so, yes.
Thanks.
Ooh, I've just remembered my last question too. Thanks, Dave. The other question I had was, in terms of, you noted in your preamble, Andrew, that this has a direct correlation on the reform process for local government. Except this is coming first and that's slightly behind, which is unhelpful. But I wonder if we can make a reference to that in our feedback about potentially, how would I think about it, understanding the implications for general local government reform, because I suspect that that's a large part of the fear and concern in the wider community. Especially the smaller councils, what does it leave us with? What will we be here for? So we might as well, that's the elephant in the room. Let's say so and reference it, that we want to understand how this fits in with their thinking about. That's my question. Do you think that would be useful addition to the?
I do. We can add that in as well. Yep.
If anybody disagrees with me, then fine.
I think some of the other reforms will enable some of the discussions we've had around governance, for example, or direction. So, for example, the RM reforms in their legislation might provide the framework to direct some of the growth investments back in the water entity. So, while there's 3 separate reforms, they are integrated and linked.
It is a 3-legged stool, isn't it? I suppose I'm asking. There could be some changes to councils across the regional. Territorial lens of RMA, if it goes natural environment and built environment split off, that could make a difference to the functions of regional versus local territorials.
You're well outside my remit now. So
Maybe,
I
maybe
don't-
I'm just
yeah.
thinking too far ahead. Councillors, there are no more questions, but what I'm going to do is slightly bit unusual. I'm going to take a tea break, partly because that allows you a quarter of an hour to digest the complexities. You can ask Andrew and anyone else. You can ask some questions because we'll come into debate. Ryan?
Happy to move it, so you're not at the table.
Yeah, I'm happy to move you and second it. But
Sorry, just a point of process then. I thought we were going to have a discussion about, or some sort of checking off about what extra we might want to add.
Yeah,
to,
so after a tea break, I just thought that might...
before if you put the motion in, that sort of actually gets in the way of that, doesn't it?
Okay, doesn't matter because we'll move in a second then. But what I'd like to do is just take a wee break, a wee breather. You know, Stephen, Andrew, and Myri are all here. I'm here if you want to hear something from local government. Let's have a think for a quarter of an hour and then come in, settle on what we want to go in and out of the document, and have the debate while we're a bit fresher. Is that okay? Right, we have a quorum. We'll begin. Thank you, everyone. I think that break was useful because a number of you were able to talk through some of the issues of interest. And so, are there any residual questions as arising from that little break? If not, what we'll do is see if we've captured, see if you've captured the feedback, and then we'll have some debate on it. Are there any other questions? No? No questions? Questions all happy? So, Andrew, do you want to summarise what you think we were asking for?
I'll give it a go and you can correct me. So
Yeah.
there's 5 key amendments or additions to make. So the first is something around asset value transfers and debt. The second is around an inclusion of the reference to the regulatory regimes. The third is around the iwi and adding in the Te Mana o Te Wai aspects. The fourth was in relation to referencing implications through the other reform programs, local government reform and RM reforms. And then the fifth I had was some more robust models around certainty for the governance models.
That's not very inclusive of the points that were raised about
Yeah,
governance.
no, that's fine, Dave. I was just going to
Yeah.
say that now do the next step, in which is say, have we missed anything there? You want,
With governance, I think we should be specifically saying there needs to be a governance mechanism that works with the transitional or trial period. If this is going up as a trial, and there's certainly going to be a transition period, like you mentioned, like Auckland City Establishment Board.
Yeah.
So there should be governance
okay.
for
So we
this
need to
particular
understand.
region as a trial that maybe tests out governance models for a future permanent solution.
Yeah, so we need to think about the detail of governance throughout the transition period, governance structures.
And perhaps that governance model needs to work out how it gets the voice of all participating local authorities. So whether you have one representative for a group of them, or you have one for each, or what sort of advisory, who they report to, that sort of stuff.
Okay, captured. Anything else that we missed in the, or at all? No, with the feedback? Because I'd rather we poked it up now. The debate is the debate. And good morning, Kesh. And what this will help me and others do is be clear about our voice over the next week and couple of weeks before we get the dashboards. And I really want to accurately portray the view of council as far as practical.
Where does the feedback precisely go, if I could ask Paula, thanks?
It goes to Local Government New Zealand.
Can we also feed it directly into the ministry? Because while LGNZ's doing its stuff, collecting the thoughts, the ministry is not going to be sitting on its hands. It's going to be racing to try and get things finished. So it'd be handy to approach it from both.
And there would be no problem with CCing in the relevant ministries and ministers?
No, I think it's a very good suggestion.
Right, thanks, Zach. That's good. Rob?
Is it fair to say that local government New Zealand changed their stance? Because previously they didn't really want to get involved at all. And are they, if they have changed their stance, are you comfortable that they are going to be a good advocate for all of the groups, both those who want to opt in and those who may want to opt out? Or should we be, looking at some other organisation that might advance what is the best outcome for all of the councils around the country?
My response to that is actually yes, they are embracing the challenge. They understand the challenge of those who are in and those who are not in yet. And they are tapping into the expertise, of areas, and that's why they're interested in what Hamilton has to say as well as one of the growth metros, not the only growth metro. And they're talking also with Auckland, of course. I think they are. I think they are in a negotiation with government at the moment around the transitionary arrangements, around the sequencing of information coming to the public. And I think that you'll hear from them regularly between now and the local government conference. Luckily, I have been able to inputs too. So that's why this is important to me, because I can keep this voice in that conversation.
It just concerns me that when you look at the numbers and the sizes of different councils around the country, you know, the numbers would support smaller councils, and I know the voting doesn't work that way, but numbers would support the smaller councils, and it may be the smaller councils who are generally likely to be wanting to opt out rather than in.
Yeah. I still think that local government through National Council is doing a very good job. They understand the urgency. They understand the complexity. They've hired some pretty high-powered consultants and lawyers to navigate this space. As long as they keep communicating with us and we can communicate back, I'm happy. But taking on board Dave's point, if we can get in other ears around the side as well, we should definitely do what's in our own right interest as well.
So Local Government New Zealand is, as always, represents the country, and there's multiple views in the country. What they bring is a benefit of ensuring the process is robust to enable, like Mayor Paula is suggesting, that those individuals that may differ from the collective mass or a smaller group of people or councils are, to actually have a mechanism for their voice to be heard. So, you know, that's what a true membership body does, and they're doing that quite well. But we've also got, advocating on our behalf, we've got, Tai Tuara, what was previously referred to as Solgum, acting in that vehicle as well. Very much the same people in council that we deal with, that are dealing with LGNZ, are dealing with them. As well as what Mayor Paula has indicated is a direct input at a ministerial level. We've also got a number of staff who listening to the direction this council is setting, represented on national bodies, at the forefront of developing the changes that are there as well. So all of these layers should give you confidence, and if any in particular point you don't feel like our position has been heard, you need to talk to Mayor Paula and myself, and we can make sure that those positions, even outside of this forum we're currently talking about, are propelled upwards as well. Mayor Paula is almost becoming individually recognised as someone that's trying to, one of the mayors that is really trying to make this thing polished, and staff are also in that position now as well.
So how will we know that Local Government New Zealand is not advocating a position? I mean, this is all going, seems to be it's going to happen quite quickly, and time we get back to another meeting here or the reference group meets again, it may well have advanced a little further down the line, and we may be past a point of no return on some of the particular areas that we might want to advocate strongly on.
So trust the Mayor Paula and trust the staff.
I don't mistrust that. That wasn't my intention.
No, I know. I was going to say that local government will not take one position on behalf of the sector, because Richard is absolutely right. But they will. There isn't one necessarily. So what they will do, however, is pick up the key strands and have negotiations with the government, and those negotiations around timing, around sequencing, around financing. And we all know that even when the dashboards come out, there'll be another round of reaction and questioning of government. So that's actually a useful point, because we've only got the global data at the moment. We haven't got the localised data, and we'll have the local data. And I can absolutely assure you, Councillor, when those dashboards, we will find the time as a governance unit to have a really good look at that from our perspective then. And then local government conference is likely to have some other announcements of sorts and what they look like. Meanwhile, local government's focus is on informing the process and that the government understands the range of concerns that the sector has and that they're prepared to address them. So I'm seeing, I mean, look, they're going to have to earn their money now. Local Government New Zealand have really been put under the gun, and I think they're working every hour of the day and most of the evenings at the moment to shape this thinking. We've got good staff here too. Stephen, did you want to?
Yeah, just on the reference group, our next meeting's not for another few weeks, but if anything comes up at any time that we need political input for, that's what the purpose of the reference group for, and so we'll give you every opportunity to assist us to influence our position.
And there are weekly webinars, councillors, and they're not. There are some occasional mayors forums, but outside that, there are weekly webinars that have been shared. The link has been shared, and local government Stuart and Susan do through that forum talk with the membership, and you can do the Q&A as you do online and that kind of thing. So I'd suggest that jump on those.
Are we getting those emailed to us? Because I don't remember. I don't remember seeing them, but that doesn't mean to say they haven't been.
We've only had one, but I'll find out.
And I'll take it on board with, if you guys can just follow that back through and making sure that where there are scheduled events that's made available through governance, through to the elected members via governance as well, please.
James,
so I don't think you dropped the ball yet. I don't think there's been many yet.
No, there's been one.
Okay.
There's been one. James,
So
were those intended as all of membership? I think they were, weren't they? And there's been some that aren't all of membership, but there wasn't there?
I need to check, but I will let everyone know.
Okay.
And can I suggest that perhaps you ask them if they could put a recording on afterwards, because sometimes these webinars don't suit our timings with all of the meeting schedules that most of us currently have, and to be able to go back the next day and actually watch the recording of the webinar is better than having missed it in the first place.
And just, absolutely, and just note that in this report in the front, there are the, excuse me,
And neon.
there are the links. There are the links, and if you look at any of those sites, they're being updated on a daily basis. So if you've got the time to read into them, I suggest that you do have a look at those on a semi-regular basis. Does that help as well? Okay, so we've got those. Was there any other feedback apart from the additional comment that Dave made? Was there any other feedback that you want to include in that sheet? No? Okay, so then we'll go into debate. Somebody moved. Was it you? Mark, did you move this? Someone moved. Ryan. Right. Oh.
You were going to move it, I'll second.
Okay, I'll move it. You second. And we'll go into debate. I'm just going to make my opening remarks quite short because I've obviously had quite a bit to say on this already. Just make the point that councillors, we need to be alert to every change here. We need to be across the detail. Our staff are doing a great job. Local Government New Zealand are open to their membership, so you have a conduit to Local Government New Zealand as well. Change is coming though. Change is coming across the local government sector. What that change looks like, the details are yet to be determined, but we can, I believe, have a really strong steer on the details, and we should be able to have all of our questions answered. But we can also model a really productive, collaborative, positive way forward, because, Martin, that's what we're good at. And we can talk with those neighbouring councils and get alongside. Not everyone's going to agree in this process. It's just such a huge change. It's really disturbing the sector across the country. And those that are going to be most affected will, of course, be the rural and provincial councils. But if we've got the opportunity to do something that is cost effective and efficient for our citizens, then I believe we should do it. And that's why I believed, as I didn't say in my previous column, that we should be shaping the future, not resisting change. And so thank you for your feedback today, because it does help me to go into those conversations with a sense of how you feel. And obviously in the debate, I'm also going to get a further sense in how you feel. Because I dare say that in some respects, your views will mirror the wider local government whānau. So thank you.
Point of order, Chair. Shouldn't part 3, where it says attachment 5, the staff reports, have something added, plus consideration, plus some commentary during the meeting, or something like that?
Yeah, we did discuss that, didn't we, Stephen? That the recommendation would include approves the feedback subject to, with the added, yeah, what's words you normally use there, Becca? To incorporate feedback from this meeting. Can you just jigger the words by the time we get to the vote? Thanks. Councillor Wilson.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor Paula. This is a significant issue that this council and others are facing. I think the best term I would use, there's an air of disruption occurring, and we've got to get this right. I'm reminded a few days ago that we signed off tens of millions of dollars of ongoing renewals and maintenance on our water infrastructure. And these are assets that potentially we may no longer own, and that we will have, on behalf of the ratepayers, invested heavily. And we, so far, are not 100% sure of what the ownership structure of those assets could be. I'm also mindful that we may have done the right thing and continue to invest in our infrastructure and be pulled with other councils whose infrastructure they haven't looked after. And again, we're not quite sure what the ownership and management structure will look like. So I don't think we could use any other word other than this is a moment of disruption and high risk. And so I'm comforted the fact that Mayor Paula, Councillor Dave, and I understand Manga Norm is going to continue to have an active role in ensuring there is a really good outcome for the City of Hamilton. However, I'm also mindful that some of the other councils have shown an absolute reluctance to work in a broader sense, and they seem to be more interested in protecting their silos, which leads to an opportunity where government may just intervene. And again, I don't quite know what that looks like. So I'm feeling a little cautious, having signed off again tens of millions of dollars just in the last couple of days of renewals of infrastructure, and we may no longer own these assets. So this is of a serious nature. I'm pleased we have people, both in staff and our governance members, at the forefront. I'm worried about some of our other councils, but it is a process. We've got to wait and see, but it is of considerable importance, and I look forward to hopefully a really positive outcome for our ratepayers and this city as we sort of join a broader collective and they bring some of their baggage along. So watch this space.
Thank you. Councillor Gallagher.
I think the Mayor, you invited me to be positive, and I will certainly attempt to do that. In 1989, and this has got to be seen in the context of significant proposed local government reform, this is just, in my view, a very significant part of that. And if the current government survives into a third term, then there's no doubt there will be a significant ongoing reform program. I'm not sure what the opposition feels at this point. In 1989, of course, if you'd left it to local government, we would still have the counties and the boroughs and the municipal association and the counties association, you had a combination of a minister who I don't always agree with, the Honourable Michael Bassett, and that government, and also Sir Ross Jensen, the Mayor of this city, who was the first inaugural chair of local government New Zealand and the municipal association. So you had the partnership, you had the combo where you had visionary people in local government working with central government, and I'm hoping that Stuart Crosby as our chair and Paula Southgate and others at that national level will, if you like, go through a bit of the history pages of 89 and recognise that this is a partnership. Seize the opportunity, do not resist it. This is also not this government. Don't forget, it was a National Party ACT party government, government, that gave us Super Auckland, all right? If you'd left it to the Auckland people, mind you, back in '89 it was a series of boroughs and Newmarket Borough, this, that and the other. If you'd left it just to the local government, it would not have happened. Obviously, Auckland Super City is not perfect, but in my humble view, it is a step forward from where they are. I'll just make a final point when it comes to Owen Water's experience. In hindsight, and I say this with great affection for my good friends in Waipa, if I had realised on that particular working group that Julie Hardacre was part of, and I acknowledge her work in that area, that Waipa were never in any way going to come to any reform type table, then maybe I would have been more open to the Waikato-Hamilton CCO type model. Okay, we wanted to go a certain shared waters because we thought that would get Waipa incorrectly across the table, and even as we know with Wellington's infrastructure investment, Greater Wellington, that is not necessarily even a totally perfect model at all. So I did question before, because quite frankly I think our regional, where it's been left to us, in spite of the best staff, the best will, and I've got to be fair to Mayor Paula, Mayor yourself, and also Mayor Southgate, Mayor Andrew King, the leadership's been there, but sometimes to bring some of the partners along has not succeeded. So I really hope that we do develop, and I think we are, a really good partnership with central government to finally get some reform that we all recognise has to happen both in waters and local and regional government in general across the line.
Thank you, Martin. Councillor Pascoe.
Thank you, Chair. Look, I think Hamilton City Council is in a very strong position to have a national leadership role around the waters reform. 8 years ago, we formally started that journey, and we picked up, and there's a number of councillors still around the table involved in that. We've picked up a good deal of experience. We know what some of the nuances are. We know what the ups and the pros and cons are of such a major reform. So I think we should be capitalising on that role, both locally in this region and nationally. I don't believe central government has any other option except to pursue major reform. The risks around the three waters are already well documented. The list is becoming endless by the week. Hastings, Wellington, Auckland, Dunedin, Ruapehu, Ratahi, all suggesting either non-compliance and or significant underinvestment in water assets. So the government's reform will hopefully address that. I am where am I? And I think that the opting in and opting out, I think that will answer itself reasonably quickly, because councils will be required to report from the 1st of July to the new Water Commissioner. And that Water Commissioner, the question that the Water Commissioner will be asking is your fresh drinking water compliant? And I think that will bring reality to the table of some of the councils when their water engineers report that they are not compliant with current water, and the fact that even if they are, the cost to remain compliant going forward could be so significant that they may not be able to afford that on their own. As always, the devil will be in the detail, and managing this in the short time frame that the central government are giving us will be very challenging. And I think we need to make sure that we are on that fast train and that we are collecting the information that we need so that we can make the appropriate decisions and be in a somewhat more dominant role, given our experience in this area, than to be a taker of what eventually gets offered by central government. I think one of the major areas that, and we're focused on that today, is around the asset transfer. We have a significant obligation to our ratepayers, and Councillor Ewan has already alluded to that. The fact that we have, and we're struggling to maintain renewals, that we should actually make sure that we get some of those funds back and that there is a proper transfer of assets. So I'll be watching that particularly closely going forward. And the cost savings around water reform are well documented around the world, and we could expect to see some significant cost reductions to our ratepayers as a result of this reform if it's implemented correctly. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McPherson.
Thank you. I support the comments of all three previous speakers here. I certainly support us taking this step here now. Basically, we're saying we should be going early and going hard, I think, to use a phrase that's recently been used in another context. It's clear that this is needed and that we should be involved early rather than being dragged kicking and screaming. I think those councils that put themselves in that position will not have much influence over the final outcome. Three waters related issues amongst the biggest issues councils ever face. Councils can fall, and some have fallen, on how they've handled issues in the water area. In the case of one, Kaipara, they didn't have a council for about 6 years as a result of the way they were mishandling some water-related issues. I would put in a couple of notes of caution. One is that having water reform is not a proxy for bringing in water meters, though I'm very encouraged every time someone does raise that, because I can recycle the same billboards that I've had in previous elections. Or some people use the euphemism volumetric measuring. Whenever you hear that term, just read water meters, Chris. The other caution is the way that Watercare was sent up and handled things initially. They didn't have much democratic input into the way they're being run. They were being run as a technical organisation covering the whole of the Auckland region ahead of the Auckland Super City being set up, and they made decisions which on the surface appeared fair but caused a lot of problems, especially in lower socio-economic area. Some of their charging regimes, cutting off supply in some cases, causing a lot of community angst. That is why I'm quite hot on there being good governance input right from the start, and not just after the entity's set up, but in the setting up of the entity. That's really important, I think. I've seen that it has some positives in Wellington when they can do that, notwithstanding the fact that they were so far behind in their maintenance and upkeep of their infrastructure that they'd caught them out in the end, but at least there wasn't much angst about the way it was set up and being run, and the fact that those that didn't initially buy in saw the advantages and did buy in at a later stage, so that they ended up with the whole of the greater Wellington region involved there. So I'm saying get elected members involved somehow, get their voice in there, so there's an element of community input and local democracy involved in this as well, and you can be successful. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Thompson.
Thank you. I think the writing is on the wall here that change is needed. We have an obligation to ensure that our communities have safe, healthy drinking water, and we've seen what happens and the stress that communities come under when they find that their water isn't safe to drink. And we don't want that to happen to any community here in New Zealand. So absolutely support us going forward, not only to help ensure that we have the right investment for safe, healthy drinking water and to look after our environment, but also to ensure affordability. We've heard that for municipal councils, for cities, we'd be looking at a 3 to 8 times increase in rates, or the cost of water for households if we carry on down the current path. And so there are clearly huge cost savings that will come from amalgamation. And 100% agree that we need to be at the forefront of this and leading discussion and giving input. Now, particularly in terms of how our community has a voice going forward. And so I agree with Councillor Dave that democratic input will be really important, and it would be worth having a really good discussion as a council about what that could look like, and what we think that should potentially look like. In terms of water demand management, another good euphemism, it is critical, obviously, and I think through our water stimulus work, we are actually looking at that. So I think we also need a really robust and open conversation about how we approach that going forward. What are our options? How have other places achieved reductions in the use of water to ensure that we have a sustainable approach for going forward? Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Any other before I take my right to reply? Okay, thank you everyone. I just want to thank you for the quality of your feedback today. This is fast moving and it is hard to keep up with, but you've hit the nail on the head. A lot of your feedback mirrors the feedback that is happening in the wider community, that the detail will be critical in how we move forward. This is a serious matter. Ewan's quite right. We already know here in Hamilton that it's a third of our costs. That's why we made that move in the long-term plan to be clear in the division of our rates where water sat, so that the community could understand the costs coming in the water space. The pace in this process is a problem. The pace is a problem. It's just so fast. I believe also that the asset transfer is something that is critical to this, because there are some high-functioning assets. Oh, thanks, Dave. Good. There are some high-functioning assets, and there are some assets that have been underinvested in across New Zealand. And Sarah's right. This is all about providing safe, effective, but also cost-efficient services to our community. And we're not just talking about drinking water. We're talking about wastewater, which feeds into the water quality of our river and our tributaries, our lakes and so on. We're also, interestingly enough, talking about stormwater, and it intrigues me that in this debate, rarely does that get touched on other than sort of glossed over, because it is three waters: drinking, waste and stormwater. And stormwater is the one where around the country where we've all done least. So that's really interesting for me. I'm open to working, I remain open. I talk with my colleagues across the region, the mayors from across the region. I'm open to continue to working with them to see what we can come up collectively. But we must forge forward, and that's what I'm doing. I strongly believe that this is our chance to influence the future, because, Sarah, you're right, change is coming. So let's influence it. Let's show leadership and influence and get the best outcome for Hamiltonians. And in terms of the finances, that's part of the conversation. We need to understand the fiscal envelope that government brings to this change. And then, the most important bit is we need to push for the best deal for us. So, thank you everyone. We'll go to the vote, which it now says we've included reference to the edits. Yep. Can we see it? Yep. Oh, yep. Subject to the incorporation of feedback received during the meeting. Does that cover it, Dave? Yep. Okay, let's go to the vote. Thanks.
The motion is carried unanimously.
Thank you all. Oh gosh, I lost my screen. Mission. It's a late item. So where do we find it? Where do I find it? Where do I find it, the late item?
It's on.
Oh, there it is, down there.
Further down. Okay.
All right.
I wonder if I may put up a revised motion at the outset, just for elected members' visibility.
You're welcome to put up a motion. There is no revised motion at the moment.
Oh, sorry, a new motion. I think it might just reframe the debate and the discussion and even the questions possibly, if elected members get some visibility over this. seemed a
Okay, so
good plan.
that's moved by you and seconded by
Councillor Dave.
councillor Dave. You're seconding this, councillor McPherson? Okay, cool.
I can briefly, in a nutshell, give a quick summary if it helps.
Yes, just before we get to the debate and questions, I will take staff comment on and staff comment, just a preview of this, and then we can ask questions and we'll understand where you're heading with you. Is that all right?
Yeah, sure.
Morena. So look, this is a submission on the review of the charitable trust licensing conditions for casinos. Just from the outset, I think the key point here is that the Gambling Commission has asked for some comment on this. Look, it's very, very much in early days in terms of very early in the process around this. We understand that this particular submission in the form of some feedback is for the Commission to take in, to digest and form a view on that. Part of that process will be to inform themselves and then produce a consultation document. And of course, at that point, we'll have an opportunity for further comment on that particular review. I must acknowledge from the outset, though, look, that we've done this submission at pace. We caught this late in May, so we apologise for that in the sense that we weren't able to do the customary briefings and the workshops around the formation of this submission. We have, though, provided a draft and then a second draft for feedback. We unfortunately didn't receive any feedback on that, but look, this is an opportunity for us to discuss the submission and the direction. I think it's really important at this particular point, though, we haven't obviously engaged with any stakeholders and partners in regards to the submission, and I think it's important that from our perspective, probably we could have had a conversation with Sky City Casinos informing this view in advance of this particular conversation today. So that's just acknowledging that as a key stakeholder, them as being a key staker in the CBD as well. Look, again, I think the key point here is that once there will be a consultation document that comes out from the Commission on this, we'll have an opportunity to further engage on this. There'll be some engagement with our stakeholders and partners around this as well. So I think in terms of the submission, I think the key points here, though, are that it sort of is consistent with our previous themes around our submissions that the city's produced on this particular matter. There's a level of alignment and consistency with other metro councils in this particular space, and also it's really the emphasis is around a national consistency around this particular issue as well. So I think in terms of some options going forward, look, I think there's potentially 4 options. One is to run with the submission as particularly drafted. We haven't got any feedback on that to date. Run with the submission with some amendments, particularly in terms of the percentage that Sandra will talk to shortly. Potentially make a more submission at a more strategic level, not getting into the specific detail, which an opportunity for that will come in at a later point. Or equally not make a submission at all. So they're probably the 4 options. Just want to acknowledge that in the paper that we presented to you, we didn't go through those particular options. So again, that's probably something that we should reflect on as well. Acknowledging from staff perspective, this is a sensitive issue. There's many views on this particular topic. So from my perspective as staff, look, we look forward to your feedback. We look forward to the discussion and direction around this. So just open it up for any questions.
Thank you. We will take some questions. So are all other councils submitting, or are there some you're aware of that have chosen not to?
Some have chosen not to submit.
Do we know which ones?
Off the top of my head, I can't remember. So
I understand Auckland haven't decided not to submit.
Okay. Thank you. Jeff, do you want to? Oh, hang on. Questions. Sorry. Do you want to explain? Yep. Explain what you've done, and then we'll have the questions that may fall into that as well.
One sentence. Here we go. Thanks, Mayor Southgate. And thanks for that, Grant. So this new motion accepts that licence conditions for casinos need to be reviewed, that a national approach is needed, and the submission reflects the view that casinos could possibly pay a greater percentage of profits to the community. It moves away from what's in the submission in terms of casinos becoming part of our Class 4 policy and recommending they pay 40% of gaming machine profits to the community. Yep, that's it. But it does suggest that they could pay more.
Thank you. Councillor Gallagher.
Yes, I just want to clarify the seconder. Could the Deputy Mayor confirm, or Councillor McPherson confirm, that that is a correct record, that Councillor McPherson is actually seconding the Deputy Mayor's motion? Is that correct?
I'll either confirm or deny.
Martin, that's
Yeah, it does.
right. Let's just move on. Move on. Councillor Pascoe.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I have got some questions, sensible ones.
Comic timing supreme.
First question is, we use the word net proceeds for the charitable organisations and casino wins for casinos. Arithmetically, is that the same amount?
No, not exactly. So net proceeds would be more talking about the whole proceeds for the casinos' income, so including restaurants and alcohol sales. That's all of their proceeds. Casino win is just the money that is generated from gambling activities minus the payout.
Minus the payout. So the casino win would generally be higher than the net proceeds.
I suppose it would depend on the nature of the business activities that the casino was undertaking.
But the casino has food and all those other things too, doesn't it? And liquor and entertainment and...
Yes, it has all those, yes.
Okay. Did we or have we since undertaken any analysis to look at what the appropriate percentage could be? You know, for some reason, for charitable organisations, government or legislation has decreed 40%, minimum of 40%. For whatever reason, it's 1.5 for casinos. Has anyone done any work to suggest what would be an affordable amount? And I'm asking that question because casinos are typically listed public companies that have earnings per share and have share prices and viability and the need to reinvest.
We haven't done that work. The Gambling Commission has looked at that briefly on a licence by licence basis as they've been looking at various casinos' licences. But as they say in this review, they want to do a more in-depth analysis on what is an appropriate percentage, and that is part of what will be in the review.
So should we include that in our submission, before we start making any... Well, we haven't made a suggestion there as to what it should be.
What will happen is the Commission will consider the feedback that us and other councils are providing, which is about scope of what that should be in that review, and then they will come back to us with a discussion document with more formalised suggestions for what might actually occur in those casino licence conditions, and then we would have a say in it, because at that point we would have information to guide our suggestions.
Okay, last question. Does the legislation for casinos, in terms of that 1.5, dictate how the casino manages the donations that it makes to charitable organisations in a similar way to the charitable organisations that dish out that 40%?
It's not the same as the way Class 4 charitable donations are managed. The reason the review is occurring is because casino licence conditions are still, to a certain extent, based on prior legislation. And so this review is to bring the Gambling Act more to the forefront in the way that those things are managed. The existence of the charitable organisations and the money being distributed to the community is not actually in the legislation. It's just in the licence conditions, and that's one of the things that the Gambling Commission is suggesting that is reviewed.
Okay, so we will still continue to advocate in our submission for a change in the way that they manage whatever the appropriate level of community donation would be?
Yes, so we have suggested in the submission that Casino Win is used. This is consistent with what the other councils were also looking at doing, so that, again, that national consistency element. And as to actually how that percentage is calculated, I think the Gambling Commission needs to do that work and put some suggestions forward with some data and information behind how they arrived at those percentages for stakeholders to consider and comment on.
And then the next step, of course, is how they manage their donations back into the public space. You know, do they have applications? Do they have a proper application form? And do they have, you know, do they set conditions and have a panel who approve and reject applications?
The proposed submission that we've put forward has some commentary around that, particularly based on prior submissions and consultations that have happened at Hamilton City Council, to suggest that there is an avoidance of the replication of the Class 4 method of distributing funds, because it's well known that there are problems with that distribution method. So it would be good to avoid replicating a system that we know there are problems with.
But improving the one, but improving it where it needs improvement.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, Chair.
So, thanks to Jeff for getting a little bit of information from Sky City that you circulated yesterday and emailed Jeff. Just in terms of, there's a difference, isn't there, between casinos and non-casinos, machines that aren't pokies and pokies, right?
Correct.
And so this is, does this encapsulate all forms of gambling, or is it the pokey element?
The review is for casino licences, so both pokies and non-pokey gambling at casinos.
So was the original intent of this report to seek 40% of all of their revenue from?
No, the original submission clause was that 40%, at the moment for non-casino pokies, they pay 40% of their gambling machine profit to the community. And as a proposed submission and other councils have put forward, that this should be in alignment between what casino pokies, for the pokies. Yeah. So the 40% number that you're referring to was put forward specifically for pokey machine gambling funds, not all activities within the casino. So,
do we know how much of their business is pokies as opposed to different? No.
It varies from casino to casino. The Hamilton Sky City did, of course, increase the number of gaming machines that they have, and we did note in the submission the challenges of having a sinking lid policy for Class 4 while the casino gambling machine numbers are able to increase. So that has been in previous submissions.
Just a question, because I did see the media article yesterday, and when I've read through the report, the things intimated in that press release that I don't see here, was anybody approached for comment? Because this is only a draft.
Correct.
It's not a decision of council. It hasn't been made a decision of council. Was there any conversation around that?
I was not aware of any media communication.
Not that we're aware of.
Okay. All right, thank you. Any further questions, Councillor Thompson?
Thank you, Mayor Paula. My question was just around the comments we made in terms of where any money should actually go, and we've said preferences for it to be focused on reducing harm from gambling. Have other councils also kind of supported this approach? I had a quick look through Christchurch and Dunedin's one, and I didn't see it there. But just, interested in if others are supporting this approach as well.
The submissions of other councils did not go into as much detail with those specifics as we did. I pulled that information from prior submissions that Hamilton City Council has made, and also from public consultations that we have had over, for example, the Class 4 gaming policy. So I put that information in there based on those views that had been expressed previously. and also to support the concern around the current model for Class 4.
Yeah, yeah. And because, I mean, I think it's a good approach to take. I'm wondering if we, I guess, do you think we've been clear enough or strong enough in that approach in our submission here to kind of show, or...
I think that at the moment, given that this is a scoping exercise for what should be in the review, I think the current wording clearly indicates to the Commission that that should be taken into the review process, and hopefully that will mean that they have a look at that.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So this is issues to then them to review, and do they come back to for more
Yes,
feedback again?
They will come back again with a discussion document that has more specific proposals for us to comment on.
Yeah. So I think that's the key point, as I was trying to make at the start, is that they've asked us for essentially, they've termed it a submission, but I would probably more for them to feedback into them to inform themselves in terms of what they're looking to review, from which then they will then go back out to the community with an informed position and some supporting information from which we then can make an informed comment on. So it's probably, like I said, it's very early days in that process.
Okay, thank you.
Cool, thank you. Just in terms of the comments you said about working with stakeholders and the time, just being a very short period of time, you were in contact with SkyCity before yesterday?
No, we weren't. No, not to my understanding. So look, like I said, in terms of we moved at pace to get the submission pulled together upon understanding that there was a submission period. My comment was very much like, given that there are a significant partner and CBD entity, we probably should have just reached out to them and just give them advance notice of this particular meeting today. That's all.
And that would be the normal approach, Council?
Yeah, generally speaking, in terms of just engagement with key stakeholders, that would be the general approach that we would take. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. Councillor McPherson.
I've got a question rising there. Did you contact any of the key partners in the social services area who deal with gambling harm in the community, such as Oasis from Sally Army and Problem Gambling Foundation?
I briefly contacted the Problem Gambling Foundation in order to determine if they were putting a submission in. The Commission did publish a list of all of the organisations who were putting a submission in.
No, but in terms of the preparation of what's going in here, did they have input into that?
No.
No, thanks.
Okay, fair enough. Councillor Gallagher.
Yeah, I'd like to obviously just follow up respectfully on Councillor McPherson's points, and I know totally get the submission, good submission is really important given the history. I'll outline that a little in debate, forgive me. Can I just, through the Chief Executive and Mayor's Office, suggest strongly that the 5 city-based MPs, we've got 5 MPs in this area who cover our city, that their officers are given the opportunity also to be briefed on our submission, because very clearly, while it's to the Gambling Commission, given any potential flow-on impact, very important that our MPs are right across the key community issues that we address. If I can just get that in terms of our mailing list when we send this.
If I may, Councillor Gallagher, it's my understanding that as a matter of course, any submission that we make as a process, we are informing the local MPs, but we'll check that.
What I'm saying is I know they get different paperwork, but in one or two cases, speaking to some of the newer MPs, probably
Understand.
the opportunity to get their head across some of our concerns.
Yes.
Cool, thank you. Mover of the motion.
No, I was lining up the debate. It's all good.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So the purpose of this is I accept that the submission's fair enough. Licence conditions for all casinos need review. They've been around a long time. And also a national approach, I think, is needed. That's fair enough because it's been ad hoc over the years. And I'm also happy to support a submission which supports the the Gambling Commission undertaking the review, and that casinos could indeed possibly pay a greater percentage of their profits into the community. But I think that's really where the submission should start and finish, from my point of view, and that's essentially the purpose of this motion. I'm anxious to get away from what I would respectfully call what I think rather heavy-handed submissions that have crept into this council in recent years in terms of our approach to the casino in particular. To suggest in our submission that the casino should come under the Class 4 policy and should pay 40% of its gaming machine proceeds to the community, I think the comparison between what Sky City does and what the gaming trusts do is erroneous. It doesn't recognise the fact that Class 4 policy was set up for trusts or societies associated with bars which operate gaming machines on the side and get a fee for it. The societies don't make a profit out of it, nor do they expect it. The purpose is to distribute a percentage of the income to the community. By contrast, the casino is a private business and gambling is its business. Sorry, I've just lost my way there. They do need to make a profit, otherwise they no longer exist. And to apply the same rule for both, I think, is absolutely not apples with apples. It's apples with oranges or something else. And it also doesn't take into account the fact that we're trying to encourage people to gamble in a responsible way in a regulated environment. And a casino is the best environment for them to be doing that gambling in the city, rather than a backroom bar somewhere. And it also ignores the fact that the casino is an important corporate citizen and a very big employer. Sky City employs 290 people in Hamilton, and over the last 15 years has pumped $395 million into the city's economy. Yep, they're a casino. Yep, they encourage gambling. Yep, they want to make money. Most of us do. But they're an important corporate citizen. They're an important part of our central city revitalisation, and they're an important part of our river development. And I think we have a responsibility as a council to treat Sky City like we treat any business. Treat them fairly and even-handedly. Thank you.
Councillor Bunting.
Thank you, Mayor Southgate. Yeah, look, I'll be supporting this motion, but I will strongly suggest that we're pointing our binoculars in the wrong direction here. We're focusing on the wrong part of the party. We're missing the obvious problem. Yep, on the surface, it's not fair that casinos return just 1 or 2% to the community, sometimes less, and Class 4 venues are subject to far stronger restrictions and committed to 40%. I agree with the principle of that. However, we need to be clear on the purpose of the two entities. Pokie bars are bars with pokies in a side room, and casinos are pokie bars with a bar in the side room. This is their legitimate legal business, and unfortunately, who are we to tell any business that's legally operating where nearly half of their profits are to go? It's just a little bit of a long stretch. So the amendment, or this motion, is far closer to being reasonable and fair, yet it still achieves what I think all of us want to achieve. It's a bit more common sense and it's compassionate. But we're still focusing the wrong way. The reason I say that is paragraph 5.2 in our submission, and it says that the funding of community groups via gaming trusts has created an unhealthy dependency on gambling funding. Now, we have sat through hearing after hearing where community groups have pled with us not to affect pokie machines because they need them to survive. Kesh and I, as your community committee representatives, experience group after group in the community becoming more and more dependent on the proceeds of gambling. It's the elephant in the room. Everybody agrees it's not a comfortable situation, it's not ideal. And so we would perhaps create a perverse situation where increasing the amount coming from pokie machines in sum total is actually going to feed the beast. More and more research is showing that people who pump money into these machines too are not the same people who are benefiting from their profits. So we've got to be careful what we ask for. Our focus needs to actually be on supporting an alternative source of funding for these community groups and actively getting off our chuff and doing it. What I'd suggest is we work with Sky City, we work with Grassroots et al. And we work with all the Class 4 pokie bars on how to wean the community groups off their dependency on gambling profits. Maybe it's proceeds from GST. Maybe it's profits from legalising cannabis as it is overseas. Maybe it's government funding in a model similar to the way that the government managed the smoke-free model all those years ago. It's going to require the whole group to participate in that kind of work. And if we come out and tell the casinos we're now about to commandeer 40% of their profits, it doesn't really make for a positive outcome of those discussions. More gambling money into the community groups will feed that addiction rather than reduce it. However, I think this is a good, gentle reminder as to where this council sits, so I'm happy to support this.
Thank you. Councillor McPherson.
Thanks. Thanks to Jeff for going out of his way to see if we could get a compromise here, and I certainly support him for that, though not necessarily for all the comments he's made in his speech just now. So, in a sense, I'll be making a very different speech in favour of this. I also want to acknowledge and thank the staff for working on the submission. I think they did exactly the right thing in the given the time frame. What they did was reflect our previous submissions and our previous stances on casinos and other forms of gambling. There's nothing new that they put in this submission that wasn't already in previous work, and they cobbled that together. So I don't think there's any criticism that should apply to them for doing that, and it's coming here for our discussion. I note that we have to have casinos and Class 4 gamblings. That's the law. We don't have any choice. So it's all very well what Mark says now, and I agree with him, but in the meantime, how do we handle the gambling and the proceeds from it that are here at the moment? That's what this is actually about. And I note that the 40% or the 1.5% for Sky are only minimums. There are pokie bars or owners of pokie bars that give a lot more than 40%. There is a casino, Wharf Casino in Queenstown, gives a lot more than the legal minimum it's required to. This one doesn't. It gives the absolute minimum. Jeff, it doesn't say, the submission never said that the casino here should come under Class 4. It said in alignment with, that was the words that it used. I just checked them when I heard you say that. Casinos have been described as the crack cocaine of gambling by some overseas visitors that came here in the early days to educate us, as the community here showed overwhelming opposition to this casino. They suck far more out of the community than other forms of gambling. They operate for longer hours and provide more gambling availability. They return less to the community than other forms of gambling, as we've heard. They've got lower local ownership, much lower local ownership. And the Class 4 gambling is actually provided in premises owned by the private sector. So don't say that they're not, don't have private sector involvement. They're per machine or table, they cause a greater incidence of gambling harm than even a pokie bar does, which is more than horse racing, for instance. We have to have them, as I said before, however. They are legal, but there should be a far more level playing field while they're there, while they're legal. And that's the problem that we're talking about here, mainly debating. And sanctions have been applied to casinos. When there's talk about pokies in a back room, well, some of the casinos act effectively like large pokie bars and have had sanctions applied to them because of that. One casino was closed down for a month or so in a certain councillor's home city, and another one had other sanctions applied to it. So no forms, one of them has been cited for money laundering happening, and one of the ones that Sky City owns overseas has been cited for that just in the last month. So, you know, there's no clean hands in this industry. There never are going to be. While we have to have it, let's have a level playing field or as close to that as possible. I'm not worried about the exact percentage. I think it has to be fairer.
Councillor Gallagher.
Yeah, thank you. I support the motion, and obviously there's a degree of in between the Deputy Mayor and Councillor McPherson. Obviously we've had a long history in this city, and when I was a private citizen, I distinctly remember, I think, assisting candidate McPherson in the 1998 council election, and I recall on the ballot paper, I think if I'm correct, no casino. So let's not forget that we had a councillor at the time, because there was strong feeling, was elected on that issue. I don't think, without in any way detracting by the way in which I think the current very good manager of Sky City Hamilton manages and engages with our business and community, and I honour her for the way in which she approaches her role. We should not underestimate historically and currently that gambling harm is still a major health issue in this country. So I certainly hope the Gambling Commission will not do a sort of a once-over lightly, will address all the issues, and will look very closely at our submissions so that at least there is a fair return to the community. If I have a choice, because obviously with regard to, I think, the Sky City Company and Councillor McPherson, who's second to none in expertise in gambling harm with respect around this table, from memory, as I understand, looking at their report, the majority, significant majority of shareholders of that company live offshore, do not live in New Zealand, and as I understand, they return quite a healthy dividend to their offshore shareholders. So I think this is a realistic, reasonable submission, and also I certainly emphasise Dave Mack's question before of our need to work particularly with those people who are doing great work in the area with regard to gambling harm. I'm not detracting from the entertainment aspects of our casino in terms of some of the other really good functions they provide, and those who choose to go to the casino, that's the law, that's right through the law, obviously. Obviously, all I want to do is obviously focus that there's a fair return to the community, and obviously acknowledge the ongoing work that has been done, including by the casino, with regard to problem gambling. Thank you.
Councillor Pascoe.
Thank you, Chair. And look, I agree with Dave on the fact that we have got casino businesses in New Zealand. They are legally established. They are legally controlled, and controlled a lot more than most other businesses. They are subject to commission reviews and changes, and I guess there's enough publicity around to deter us from going there if we're not really the eligible people who should be going there. But I also remember too that gambling harm affects less than 2% of our population, and I know in this forum I've seen some big pie charts showing how that 2% looks much, much bigger than 2% of the total population. So, and I think the words in the submission, the word alignment, to me is the same as harmonising and being the same and being symmetrical. So I don't see too much in the difference between Deputy Mayor Taylor's comments about it being the same and alignment being any different. 40% of casino wins would significantly undermine the viability of a company that's set up like Sky City is, given that they have to make returns back to their shareholders, they have to keep funds back for reinvestment, and I'll come to that in a moment as to how important that might be in our economy, our local economy, as well as maintaining a strong direction on the share market. When we refer to the shares being held overseas, certainly in terms of numbers they are, but there are 17,500 shareholders in Sky City, and most of those shareholders individually would be mums and dads or Sharesies type investments, and that most of them would live in New Zealand. Hamilton has longed for and still longs for another hotel in the city. And if there is any organisation in the city that is best situated to provide that hotel, and currently it has to be Sky City. They have land set aside for a hotel. They have made various promises, albeit that those promises have not to date been delivered, but the intent is still there. And it seems to me rather crazy that we would want to attack the viability of their business when, on the other hand, we're wanting something to be established in Hamilton which would improve and enhance the economic prosperity of the city. And I suspect that that is the reason why Auckland has decided in this instance not to participate in this review. Thank you.
Councillor Wilson.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor Paula. Look, I'm really pleased that the Deputy Mayor, working with his good colleague, Councillor Dave, has found a way forward. I wouldn't have supported the previous suggestion from staff, simply because I do not believe there's any correlation between a casino and a Class 4 gambling establishment. And to suggest so is a little unfair. In fact, it's very unfair. The casino is a business. It pays tax. It has shareholders. It's highly regulated. It employs lots of people. It's an economic enabler. And I know and I accept there are some in our society who have addiction. We have that in a number of different areas, alcohol, drugs, and I'm not saying we don't need to address those, but I'm saying that a balanced approach needs to be taken, because if we ever get to the stage where the government is going to control everything, then it's going to be a pretty funless society we live in. So I'm fully supportive of what's up there, and I'm pleased some common sense and middle ground has been found.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. I'll just add a few remarks. I'm going to support this because I think there has been an attempt to rebalance the pressure. I value Sky City as a key business in our city, and I think they do well more than we would realise. It would be interesting to invite them to tell us more about what they do, which includes free use of their facilities, all kinds of supportive events and clubs and things like this, and they're looking at their future business. I think it's all been said by other speakers around them being a private business, so therefore being slightly in a different position, and we think we've all agreed in the debate that the Class 4 rules are different from the general rules for casino. Yeah, look, we do want to work closely with our business. The biggest disappointment for me was that we just didn't even take the time to alert them to the relevant item on the agenda. So the first they knew about it was when they read in the paper and were described as a socially irresponsible business, which I feel is somewhat unreasonable because we hadn't made a decision at that time.
Point of order.
Yes.
Inaccuracy in your statement. For Stuff to have included comments in their article published yesterday, they must have spoken to them before the article was published.
They must have spoken to
Sky City before. Your comment was just that Sky City didn't know about it until they read the article in the newspaper. That's not accurate. Till they read the late agenda, they hadn't seen it until yesterday. All I'm saying that we work with businesses cooperatively. We should at least do the polite thing of letting them know a decision was going to impact upon them. However, I think the compromise we've reached here is really good, so I am going to support it, and there is another stage coming up. Right of reply.
Thank you, Ms. Southgate. I respect Dave's strong feelings on this issue. We've known each other 20 years, and that's why in recent days I've tried really hard, because I have strong views on this as well, but I've tried really hard not to antagonise him and to cause a stoush, basically, because I respect that it's important to him. We all have things that are really important to us. If Dave wanted to tangle with my pedestrian cycle bridge, then I'd want to throw him in the river, and so I'd never do that, of course. But so I get that. I get that it's important, metaphorically. And Dave's exactly right that all staff were doing was reflecting this council's previous views. My personal view is that our previous views as a council have been somewhat overheated and a little unfair on the casino. That's just my view. I think I feel we've been casino bashing too long. I wouldn't have made a submission at all on this personally, but that's just my philosophical bent. I think writing a submission like this with a recommendation that, if adopted, would put them out of business, and not notifying them that it was coming, and I'm not having a crack at staff at all, that's bloody rude. And how the hell can we expect to work alongside a business and encourage them to commit to the city and encourage them to work alongside us revitalising the central city and the river development if we're going to treat them like that? I just think we need to raise our game in terms of our relationship with a casino. You know, almost 300 people they employ, and I think it's time we started treating them with a bit of respect. Thank you.
Okay, let's go to the vote.
Fucking thing. It's time for a new bloody iPad.
We can get through the recommendations. The people are coming in respect to the public excluded item number 7. They're coming in at 2 o'clock. Yeah. So let's crack through the recommendations from open council committees, shall we? Can I move the whole lot? We do. Yeah, we do them.
Then I won't move. That was simple. I was just trying to be efficient.
Okay, yeah, it was good vision. So financial recommendations from the seconder. I'll second. Any questions or comments on that? Recommendations from the community committee on the 18th of May. Kesh, your move. I'll second. Any comments in relation to that? No? Recommendations from the Economic Development Committee.
I'll move.
Absolutely. Moved, seconded. Any comments, questions, concerns about that? No? Recommendations from the Infrastructure Operations Committee of 8th of June. Sarah? Oh, I've already done that. Yeah,
Thank you.
Sarah's
I'm happy
done
it. I'm happy to second her motion.
Moved, seconded, already done. All in favour? That there are no further.
Just a resolution to exclude the public then.
So we will move to exclude the public so that when we come in after a break, we will, or should we do an item now? We can't have a break at lunch. One. Visitors, anyway, let's move into public excluded for a second and then I'll get there.
I'll move.
Moved, seconded, all in favour? Post carried. So we're now in public excluded. We could do